Okay, today we're going to be working on Chapter 5, Lesson 5. We're going to introduce a very important topic. It is the Pythagorean theorem. So today with the video, I'm going to try not using the filter, and hopefully that goes well. So to start, the Pythagorean theorem is a theorem that has to do with right triangles. So to get us started, we want to talk a little bit about what a right triangle is and some of the parts. So a right triangle is a triangle with one right angle in it. The legs are the sides that form the right angle, and the hypotenuse is the side opposite from the right angle or across from the right angle. The hypotenuse is also the longest side of the triangle. Okay, so here we want to draw the right angle symbol on the right angle. Very clearly, that's right down here. Measure each side of the right triangle and write your measurements in the table below. We're not going to do that. These are going to be the legs right here because they form the right angle, and the side across from the right angle is going to be the hypotenuse. If we were to measure them, we would see that the hypotenuse is the longest side. Okay, one way I always like to make sure I know where the hypotenuse is if you draw an arrow straight through the right angle, it will point towards the hypotenuse. Okay, so that's one way you can always find the hypotenuse. Now here it is, the Pythagorean theorem. It is a very important theorem. It's used all the time in mathematics, so the sooner you can memorize it, the better. Here it is in words. In a right triangle, the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs is equal to the square of the length of the hypotenuse. What? Basically what that means is you take the lengths of the two legs and you square them and add them together, and that will equal the length of the hypotenuse, or the longest side, squared. Okay, so if we look at the model here where the legs are A and B with the hypotenuse C, our Pythagorean theorem says a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And that's the important part to remember. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. So, what does it do? The Pythagorean theorem describes the relationships between the lengths of the legs and the hypotenuse for any right triangle. As long as it's a right triangle, the Pythagorean theorem holds true. So we can use the Pythagorean theorem to do many things. The first thing we're going to do is to find the length of a side of a right triangle, as long as we know the other two sides. Okay, so we'll get started using the Pythagorean theorem. Examples 1 and 2, it says write an equation you could use to find the length of the missing side of each right triangle. Then find the missing length, round to the nearest tenth if necessary. Okay, so we always want to start with our Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Now c will always be the longest side. The hypotenuse must be plugged in for c. So in this case, we are solving for the hypotenuse. Again, I know it's the hypotenuse because I draw my arrow through the right angle and that points at the hypotenuse. So this has to be subbed in for c. Okay. The other two legs are subbed in for A and B. It doesn't matter which order you put them in. Generally, you put the smaller one in for A and the larger one for B, but the order really does not matter. Okay? So if this is C, we'll call this one A and this one B. So we can plug the numbers in to our Pythagorean theorem. So when I do that, I have 9 squared plus 12 squared equals c squared. And again, c is what I'm trying to solve for. Okay, so if you think back to chapter 1, we can all remember that 9 squared is really 9 times 9. It is not 9 times 2. If I wanted 9 times 2, I'd write 9 times 2. I have 9 squared because that represents 9 times 9. So that would be 81. Likewise, 12 squared is 144. And it's equal to c squared. From here, I take 81 and I add it to 144. And I get 225. Now, that's what c squared equals. I want to know what c equals. So again, if you think back to chapter 1 or 2, I need to find the square root of c to undo the square. And if I do that to one side, I must do that to the other side. So this cancels out. I can make a mullet. Okay, and I'm left with the square root of 225, which is 15. So C would equal 15, specifically 15 inches. Okay. So again, let's try another one. This time we're not solving for the hypotenuse. Again, the first thing you want to do is identify the hypotenuse. In this case, 24 is a hypotenuse, so I know that's where I'll plug in for C. The Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay. This has to be C because it is the hypotenuse. This one's already labeled as B, so we might as well let this one be A. All right, when we plug in this information, we get 8 squared plus b squared equals 24 squared. 8 squared is 8 times 8, which is 64, plus b squared. 24 squared on my calculator is 576. So now I want to solve for b. Okay, so in order to do that, I need to get b by itself. So subtract 64. B squared is equal to 512. Now again, to get b by itself, I have to take the square root of both sides because that's what undoes the squared. Okay, that cancels out. B is equal to the square root of 512, which is 22.6274 dot dot dot. Okay, so back to my directions, round to the nearest tenth. Okay, I look to the right, it's a 2, so I know that stays the same. B equals 22.6 meters. All right, so those are our two examples. All right, go ahead and try A, B, and C on your own. Pause the video. I'll be back in a minute or so to go through them again. Okay, go ahead, pause the video and try A, B, and C on your own. Okay, we should be back from trying A, B, and C. Let's go through these answers. So again, identify the hypotenuse. This is C. Pythagorean theorem. Plug these in. I'll say this is A, this is B. So 18 squared plus 24 squared is equal to C squared. 18 squared is 324 plus 24 squared, should remember it, is 576 equals C squared. 324 plus 526 is 900. The square root of 900, let me just double check here so I don't make any mistakes. Yes, it is 30. So my answer is 30 yards. Okay. B. This time I'm looking for a leg, not the hypotenuse, so I know 8 has to be plugged in for C because it is the hypotenuse. This one is B, or labeled B already, so I'll let this one be A. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. A is 3, so that's 3 squared, plus B squared equals 8 squared. 3 squared is 9. 9 plus B squared is equal to 64. I subtract 9, and I get B squared to equal 54, 55. Now I need to take the square root of both sides. B equals the square root of 55, which is 7.41619 dot dot dot, round to the nearest tenth, so B equals 7.4 miles. And the last one, again, I'm not looking for the hypotenuse, so I know this one will be C. I'm looking for a leg, it's already labeled A, so this one will be labeled B. My Pythagorean theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Plug in the information we have. A squared plus 17 squared equals 20 squared. A squared plus 17 squared, I believe, is 289. Let me check. Yes, it is. And 20 squared, of course, is 400. Right? Yes. So I subtract 289. A squared equals 400 minus 289 is 111. In order to find the length of that side, I need to take the square root of each side. This will cancel that squared on my A. A is equal to the square root of 111, which is 10.535 dot dot dot. So A would be 10.5 centimeters. Now, I know I went through those fast, so if you need to replay that part, please do so. Okay? But in the interest of keeping these videos short, we're moving on. Now, one thing, when we talk about theorems, we have the Pythagorean theorem, which says if I have a right triangle, then a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So the part that we have to know for sure is that it's a right triangle. Now we're going to talk about something known as the converse of the Pythagorean theorem, which is the reverse order of the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so instead of saying if I have a right triangle, then a squared plus b squared equals c squared, I'm going to say if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then I know the triangle is a right triangle. So it's kind of the same concept, except we're doing something different with the information. Now, instead of trying to solve for different sides of the triangle, we're going to see if the triangle is a right triangle. So it's something that we can use to prove that a triangle is a right triangle. Okay. So a converse is essentially you take the two parts of an if-then statement and you flip them around. So here, if a triangle is a right triangle, then a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, that's what we've used so far. Now we're going to flip it around and say if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then I know that the triangle is a right triangle. Okay, another example of a simple logic statement where this isn't true. Okay, with the Pythagorean theorem, the original statement and its converse are true. Okay, right here it says the converse of the Pythagorean theorem is also true. Here's an example of a statement that is not true for the converse. If it's raining outside, then I will wear my coat. Okay, that's my original statement. Now the converse of that, if I flip the if and then parts around, would be if I'm wearing my coat, then it's raining outside. And that's not necessarily true. Just because I put my coat on doesn't mean it's going to rain. Okay, so that's an example of something where the converse is not true. But in the case of the Pythagorean theorem, the converse is true. So let's see if we can use the converse of the Pythagorean theorem here. Example 3 says the measures of three sides of a triangle are 5 inches, 12 inches, and 13 inches. Determine whether the triangle is a right triangle. Okay, so in order to do this, we're going to use the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. If this ends up being true, if the statement is true and satisfied, then I know I have a right triangle. But it's very important that I realize what side is the hypotenuse and put it in the correct spot. So I look at 5, 12, and 13 and think about which one's the biggest. That would be 13. So if that's the longest side, it has to be the hypotenuse, so that one has to go in for C. The other two sides can be plugged in for A and B, and again, order doesn't matter. Generally, the shorter side will be A. So that's what I'll do. So this will be A, B, and 13 is C. So 5 squared plus 12 squared is equal to 13 squared. Okay, 5 squared is 25. 12 squared is 144, and 13 squared is 169. Now if I take 144 and I add 25 to it, guess what I get? 169. Now, does 169 equal 169? Yes, it does. That is what it means to have an equation satisfied. You're left with a true statement. Okay, so that equation is satisfied, so yes, it is a right triangle. Okay, yes, it is a right triangle. Okay, so that's how we use the converse of the Pythagorean theorem. All right, go ahead and pause the video and try examples D and E on your own, please. Try Try D and E on your own. Okay, you should be back from trying D and E on your own, and let's go through these quickly. Okay, so it says determine whether each triangle with the sides of the given length is a right triangle. Justify your answer. So again, we want to find the longest side. Okay, in this case, this would be the longest side 60, so I know this will be C. I'll make this one A and this one B. Pythagorean theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. I would write this down before every problem because you need to memorize it. If you write it down every time, that's only going to help you memorize it faster. So here I have 36 squared plus 48 squared is equal to 60 squared. Okay, 36 squared is 1296 plus 48 squared, which is 2304. And is that equal to 60 squared, which is 3600? So I take 1296 and I add it to 2304, and I get 3600. Does 3600 equal 3600? Yes, it does. So is it a right triangle? Yes, it is a right triangle. Okay, E. Now, this is a tricky one. 475, because a lot of kids, a lot of 8th graders make the mistake of just going A, B, and C and plugging them in. Well, what's the problem with that? C has to be the hypotenuse. Okay, has to be the hypotenuse. Okay, and the hypotenuse is the longest side. Well, if we have the side lengths of 4, 7, and 5, is 5 the longest side? No, it is not. 7 is. So these are wrong. This should be C. And we can let that one be A and that one be B. So make sure you look at the lengths of your triangle before you label them and plug them in. The longest one always has to go in for C. Again, Pythagorean theorem, A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, 4 squared plus 5 squared equals 7 squared. 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, 7 squared is 49. 25 plus 16 equals 41. Does 41 equal 49? No, it does not. Okay, last time I checked, those are different numbers. So is it a right triangle? No, it is not a right triangle. All right, so that is the lesson. We've gone through and used the Pythagorean theorem and its converse. Remember, C represents the hypotenuse, which is the longest side. So the longest side of the triangle must be substituted in for C. All right, and there is your assignment. Red, yellow, green. Remember, the choice is yours. If you've struggled with the lesson, do the red. If you've understood some parts but struggled on others, do the yellow. And if it was all super easy for you, do the green. Okay? Or if you really want to challenge yourself, do the green. Alrighty, have a great day.